one of my chapter in research, I had mentioned about the reports of the special rapporteur on the violence against women, its causes and consequences. So here I'll be just putting forth this in brief. That is, the thematic reporters are regarded as one of the most effective mechanisms of in monitoring human rights breaches at the United Nations. So the Radhika Kumaraswamy was named the first special rapporteur on violence against women, its causes and consequences in the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Very important over here. In 1994, she stressed in her parliamentary assessment the states have a responsibility under the international human rights law to provide, that is, to protect women from domestic violence. It was held that all governments were liable, not only in the own behavior or that of those that is agents, but also for their failure to take the required procedures to prosecute private people whose actions were deemed to be incompatible with international mandates. Now, on the basis of the report against the causes and consequences of violence, yes, over here, an important mention is that domestic violence has been broadened to include all sorts of gender inequality and prejudice that exist within the family. All acts of gender based violence against women in the family, ranging from that is simple assaults to aggravated physical battery, kidnapping, threats, intimidation, coercion, stalking, humiliation, virtual abuse, forcible or unlawful entry, arson, destruction of property, sexual violence, marital rape, dowry related violence, that is female genital mutilation, that is, and again violence related to exploitation through prostitutions, violence that is related to exploitation through related to the exploitations of, that is SETA, that is Suppression of Immoral Traffic Act. So the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women has endorsed a framework for model legislation on domestic violence published in 1996 in the United Nations Model Code number 1, useful guide to measure that should be included in domestic violence legislation. The United Nations goal is to comply with the international standards prohibiting domestic violence. Number 2, recognize that yes, domestic violence is gender specific violence directed against women. Yes, next one, that is recognize that domestic violence is a serious crime against the individual and society that will not be excused or tolerated. Establish specific legislation prohibiting violence against women in interpersonal and family relationship, protecting the women. Now, yes, programs of education, counseling and therapy for both the abuser and the victim. Domestic violence prevention and elimination programs, including public awareness and yes, educative campaigns in the police stations, also improve law enforcement officers' abilities to support survivors. Then successfully enforce the law in case of domestic violence and prevent future incidents of violence. Very important. Establish rules for protection orders and sentencing guidelines that do not trivialize domestic violence by training judges on problems such as child custody, economic support and security for survivors in case of domestic violence. Very, very important over here. Yes, provide trained counselors to assist police, judges and victims of domestic violence, as well as to rehabilitate domestic violence abusers. Encourage community participation in reducing domestic violence through increasing community awareness of the incidents and causes of domestic violence. Now, Yes, in India, we have the legal punishment against domestic violence. That is, under the law, numerous standards or provisions are in place to protect the women from violence, such as 304B of the IPC, which deals with dowry death. Again, female infanticide has been made punishable under section 313 to 316. 305 to 306 deals with aiding and abetting suicide. Then a complaint of cruelty falls under the domestic violence, can also be filed under 498A. So legal efforts very important. As I had mentioned earlier, laws related to domestic violence, that is amendment to the Indian Penal Code. Domestic violence was officially made a criminal offence under section 498A. The protection of women from domestic violence defines all sorts of violence, actual or threatened, physical, mental, emotional, sexual or verbal assault. So yes, the legal measures we did: section 4, section 5, section 6, 12, 17, 18, 19 of the Violence Act in my earlier chapter on, yes, what are the provisions related to Indian laws. We had the shelter homes, we had the medical services, of course, implementation. We had done about certain important facts about 498A of the Indian Penal Code. Yes, here we had also mentioned about all the different countries in the world which had expressed. So here now the role of Maharashtra and Rajasthan, we had explained certain cases in Rajasthan, where we saw how the National Commission for Women has also stepped in to help out when police actions are yes, incomplete. So I mean, it's not prompt. So you can see in many of the cases the National Commission for Women steps in and directs the respective police who is under the jurisdiction of that particular crime to take action and file a report, even summon the respondent, and just have the procedures of counseling and see to it that charge sheet is filed on that. Equally, the judiciary plays an important role. Yes, abuse is classified as a cognizable offence under section 498A, which implies that the accused can be detained without a warrant. So these are the important measures in India. Yes, the law enforcement agency is extremely important. They play an important part. And services to assets, that is state policy, staffing and budget decisions all have a significant impact on creation and sustainability of extensive support services in domestic abuse victims. Alternative shelters, childcare facilities, counseling, of course, generation, projects and education programs are examples of the services. Despite the fact that numerous non-governmental groups provide various forms of assistance to women, they are nevertheless influenced by state financing and goals. The provisions of alternate shelter through short stay homes, typically in collaboration with the voluntary services, has been one of the most significant short-term welfare responses of the state to domestic abuse. However, there are some disadvantages to, yes, these household operate. According to research we have done, despite a combined capacity of 370 inhabitants, only 112 women. So these are the problems that shelter homes face. Now, preventive services, very important. Choosing the best practices identified by assessing the effect and outcomes of existing efforts and recognizing successful programmatic and policy components of domestic violence responses. Now here, the first step is to determine what constitutes a good and effective response. Quality and effective interventions, according to an analyst of current NGO and state services, have the following characteristics. That's cultural specificity in design, broad and diverse services, easy accessibility, multiple funding sources, and a focus on collaboration with various sectors and holistic approach in the problem. Effective programs were also found to ethical and moral leadership as well as community mobilization. Integrating all of the best practice criteria is crucial for providing effective domestic violence situations. Now, all women police stations, family counseling cell, family courts, lok adalats, and Mahila lok adalats are great examples. Then yes, criminalizing domestic abuse, coordinate responses, better coordination between government departments, voluntary sector agencies, and the government and the NGO community helps reduce the occurrence of such crimes in the society, and increasing the awareness amongst the social setup that we have. Of course, responses in abuse cannot and should not be based solely on the personal motivation and dedication of individual implementing officers. This should be formalized as one of the districts, that is primary welfare programs operations. Here, gender must be integrated into community, state, and development paradigms. Women's control over resources and access to this should be acknowledged as a fundamental integration of development. Gender sensitization of all the stakeholders, very very important over here. That is all the stakeholders, including that is gender sensitization in all the sectors, wherein we see about it should be taught to the police, court, bureaucracy, policymakers, social workers, counselors, and other service providers, training programs. Of course, it should be emphasized once more that gender sensitization should not be limited to politicians but should also include implementation at all levels, including the grassroots levels. Yes. Over here again, the treat the batterer is a concept that is state and non-profit agencies should collaborate to develop battered center programs that others the perpetrator of violence. These has been successfully attempted in a number of sites around the world and has showed potential for yes for no repetitions. It is also strongly advised in my research that the existing database on domestic violence be supplemented by thorough empirical study on the incidence and prevalence of violence. Wife beating has significant financial, legal, and economic consequences. It illustrates the seriousness of the problem. That is, detailed investigation and analysis of this interconnections is also required. Research should seek to compile and analyze the potential of existing programs and schemes, both state and non-profit, to address the issue of domestic violence, as well as offer ways for building linkages and turning the potential into action plan. If conducted at the state level, such a study would be giving more results. Yes, again, my research also says that many women are unable to flee domestic violence because they are unaware of accessible resources and organizations that work in the field. As a result, it is critical to disseminate information about the many services that is offered. Raise public knowledge is yes issue to address in the context is raising public awareness about domestic abuse as a human right violation and dispelling the prevalent belief that marital transactions are outside the scope of community intervention. A very very important topic over here. It's necessary to create and implement educational initiatives targeted at changing the attitudes, beliefs, and bias of law enforcement, the court, and civilians. Ensure accountability mechanisms to improve the accountability of the state and NGOs working with women who are victims of violence must be established. Such a system will provide the necessary checks and balances for monitoring the quality of services provided. Lack of accountability is to the shelter occupants, the state machinery, and taxpayer is one of the reasons for the awful living conditions in state-run shelter homes. So there has to be an improvement over here. This aspect, yes. In the chapter 5, I had mentioned about countering violence against women in Rajasthan. I'll be concluding this particular in my next video about this particular topic about violence against women, that is VAW, is still a big problem for all Indian women, no matter what race, what religion, what caste, what clan they belong to. The violence happens, that is, in both married and single women who can support themselves financially. This isn't to say that though that education and economic independence aren't important or haven't placed a role in reducing the frequency and violence of that is making people aware of the important sociological issue and building organized movements amounts around the world to fight VAW, that is violence against women. The fight has to be fought on all fronts of the film. The community, yes, at home, in the classroom, and in research on the political, legislative, and in the judicial, police, and yes, socioeconomic levels, and in the classroom and also in the research. So yes, the Balarashmi Society plans for improving women. I will be continuing with this, wherein I have demonstrated in my thesis about this important Bal Rashmi, that is BRS. It has done a lot of work to improve and protect the lives of girl children. Thank you so much. In my next edition, I will be just explaining to you about this very important moment from Rajasthan.